Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea, and today we'll be talking more about organizational change and how an individual decides on a working environment for them. We've invited Shiao-Yin, who has worked with clients of all sizes to run corporate programs and change organizational situations for the better. So welcome, Shiao-Yin. Maybe you could share a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Well, if you met me at a party and asked me what I do for work, I would say I am a cultural change strategist. And in simpler English, that means I work with people and their organizations to look at what's working and what's not working in their culture. And I will help the internal change team to design a strategy of how to make the culture work better. So that can look like coaching. It can look like facilitating a crucial conversation that people don't really know how to handle. It can look like training people in social or emotional or thinking skills even that they need. And it can even look like, let me design a curriculum for change that the internal team wants to cascade down. So it can look like many things lah. So that's what I do.
All right. Can I know more about how you even delved into organizational change? Like, really curious to find out more because I myself have never gone for such a workshop before. And I also understand in your past life, you're doing something quite different from organizational change as well.
Yeah, so I wouldn't even know this was a thing. I didn't know this existed. But let me try and give the long story short version of it. I started off as a 22-year-old wanting to simply solve a problem that I saw, which was looking at why is it that 18-year-olds graduating out of junior college, there were two outcomes that I didn't think were great. One was they were unsure about who they were, and because they're so unsure, they were indifferent to what was going on in the world. And I didn't find that acceptable. So at that point of time, I had two acquaintances, friends from university who were public school teachers, and they were keen on setting up a learning center, a tuition center, to see whether there was a way to teach 18-year-olds differently so that they could to really start to mature their way of thinking and what they wanted to do in the world. And I'm giving that to you as background because I was after cultural change in a way from the beginning, but I'm not thinking of organizations. I'm thinking of 18-year-olds. And my concern is like their impact on society at large. So how organizations came into the picture is because the 10 years down the road from us running the learning center, the first 18-year-olds that we taught became 28 and they started to enter the workforce. And one or two organizations that paid attention to the way these 28-year-olds were showing up were intrigued and came looking us up about what is it that you are teaching people, how, and do you teach adults? Do you teach organizations? So that was actually how it all began, right? I guess the insight for me back then was that there really is an impact in the real world when you teach people to think slightly differently or to feel slightly differently or to learn that there are different ways of doing things. Yeah.
And then more about like understanding if there are any trends that you spotted in these organizations. Like, for example, you're very familiar with how the youth think because of your past experiences, but now you're also familiar with how organizations think. How do you think these youths shape the organizations? Do you feel based on all the different organizations and industries you have worked, the kind of generational knowledge and the kind of way they think has a lot of differences in how the organizations run?
Oh, yeah, for sure, right? Every organization, every sector, every culture, there's definitely intergenerational issues. There's differences in what each generation has experienced. And for better or worse, each generation came up with their own coping strategies, their own particular perspectives. And there will be some things that worked for one generation that don't work for another generation. And every organization, particularly the big ones, they are caught up in that dynamic of what's the better way of work, right? And some organizations are more willing to go there and have that intergenerational discussion, and some aren't. Yeah.
I see. So you mean that some organizations are keen to have like intergenerational age group differences while some are more focused on particular age groups?
I think it's not helpful when an organization, or let me be clearer, it's not helpful when, let's just say, some older leaders in an organization make an assumption that just because the way we are working right now worked before, for say the last 10, 15 years, it will work all of the time. Some parts of it probably work, and some parts probably no longer work for a new incoming generation of workers. And it is not helpful when, say, an older generation of leaders choose to see it as, therefore, there's something wrong with the younger workers. They're too soft, they're strawberries or whatever, like all these like terrible stories that you hear some of the older leaders describe the younger ones. Whereas I think a healthier intergenerational dialogue is when we sit down and we share with each other what is it that we see and what parts work and what parts no longer work. You know, and of course, on the other side, you do have the younger incoming worker. It's also an unhelpful conversation if you go in there and say, oh man, these older people, they're such dinosaurs. Like, why can't they just see it from our perspective that ABC practice is wrong? It's better to, I think, respect that there may be many things we did not see from what people went through, what people experienced, and it shaped a certain way of seeing things. Right? And if the end goal that, say, the younger worker wants is, I want something to change in the culture, in the practices, in the ethos of the organization that I'm in, then you want to choose the tactic of respect. And you can have respectful disagreement. You can have respectful, let's put things on the table. The tactic that for sure does not work is shame. Yeah, both sides, it doesn't work.
And working with organizations that have different generations, what do you think is some of the common value add that the younger generation has given and what the older generation has given as value add?
It's hard to just say it's an older and younger value add, if you like. I think that the advantage that maybe the older leaders in an organization have is it is literally the years of repeated experiences that they have gone through, right? And to not use that, let's say, the experience or the historical advantage as a way to say, see, so that's why I'm smarter than you. But to use it as like a point of, education is the wrong word, but for lack of a better one right now, it's a way to help the younger ones see that there are certain patterns of things that happen. We have gone through it and it's useful information to know, but maybe you see something new that we don't see. And on the younger side, I think there's things that you have been brought up in to expect that that were normal for us. So for example, let's try and give this a theme to work around, like mental health, mental being, right? That's almost normalized from, let's say, the millennial generation up, right? You're probably the first generation that grew up with more or less constant or normalized conversation around the need to look after mental well-being. That was not true for previous generations, right? And maybe the unkindest thing to say is, they don't care about mental well-being. That's not always true. What is fair is to say they were never given the language or the opportunity or the luxury to even talk about that, right? And that's the reason why, say, some leaders from the older generation may look at it and think that you're all just being a little bit soft, right? And I think the question to ask is, what did the older generations go through and put up with and tolerate that maybe they themselves should not have tolerated. But they were never given the perspective that is something to question. Yeah. So I do think it's healthy to open up that scary, risky conversation with the younger generation that you see this, let's say you see this sector or you see this organization with fresh eyes. Some things just stand out like, why would we do something like that? But for an older leader, that might be like, but this is normal. This is the industry norm. This is expected. And I think a better question to ask is, and did that work? Or does it not work? And to see that sometimes the picture is mixed. There is, if a pattern of behavior has persisted for a long time, it means part of it works to some degree, and that's why people don't let go of it. But there are parts that probably don't work, and that's not talked about. And we need to create that psychological safety for each other to talk about it and make those necessary changes. Yeah, for example, salary range. For example, working hours. Because it's scary to contemplate if we're going to change, this changes everything. It's to help each other see that there is risk here, but the risk shouldn't prevent us from having the necessary conversation. Yeah, that works better for all of us. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I understand from you, the older generation. I think, in my opinion, maybe they focus a lot on productivity and hence why they might think the younger generation is soft or strawberry generation because maybe we are focusing more on mental health.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what do you think made the younger generation, rather from millennial and below, start to care about topics like mental health when there are so many generations that have gone not really caring about all of this and focusing more on performance, productivity, doing what is being told. Like, what do you think, in your opinion, made such a shift in recent years?
I suppose the shift is just simply the cultural conversation changed. Mental health as a theme just got more mainstream. It went from being on the edges to mainstream. So it's not that, say, the baby boomers or Gen X, which is my generation, and then Gen Y, which is the millennials, right? So it's not that Gen Xers and baby boomers don't know there's such a thing called mental well-being. It's that at our time, it was talked about in a very different way. Or certain things didn't even have a language around it. Like being as a concept is very not mainstream back in 2 generations. But by the millennial generation, it's almost cliche. So there's definitely that transition over time lah. Yeah. So that does shape people's perspectives on whether this is important or significant. So let's just take one mental health struggle that people have, like ADHD, right? So ADHD, it's like normal to talk about it, right? It's normal to say, I'm seeking therapy, I'm seeking medicine for it, right? You have Gen Xers and baby boomers who probably had ADHD and simply coped.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I know people who, in my generation, who because it's through their kids that they realize I should get myself diagnosed as well just to check, do I have ADHD? Am I the one who passed it down to my kid? Because it's genetic, right? And I have friends who realize that, number one, they do have ADHD. And number two, I suppose the counselor or the therapist who's checking in on that is, wow, yeah, you had some amazing coping strategies so that they don't even present as ADHD. So it doesn't mean that's better or worse. It just means that we didn't have the support, we didn't have the language, and we still had to cope with it somehow. We still had to survive, So for someone who grew up that way, they can either look at it with generosity. I coped with it, and now that you all have the language and the support and all, that's great. I want that for you. But the ungenerous way to look at it is like, what's wrong with you? If I could do it, why don't you do it? But coping by yourself, struggling alone, having to maybe mask your behavior so that you'll be more acceptable. That never worked. That never worked from a relational standpoint. Maybe it worked from a professional standpoint, right? You got really good at your job. You got really good at performing what you needed to perform to fit in into the work environment. But sometimes that does something to you emotionally. And that's the work that maybe is a bit scarier to look at. Yeah.
I think that's a bit like the typical idea people have of Asian tiger moms, where they can be very controlling, high performance oriented, and maybe neglect so much the kind of emotional challenges that their children might be going through.
Yeah.
And I think with the upcoming generation now, where maybe millennial parents care more about mental health, mental being, which arises to millennials caring more about mental health in workplaces as well. I would also think that there are pros and cons as well. What do you think are some of the cons though of having so much talk on mental health? Do you think there are any downsides to that, to such a focus compared to the older generation who's all about productivity, performance?
It's a balance. I think one of the handiest concepts for any professional and leaders especially to learn is this concept called polarity thinking, right? Easier version of that term is both and thinking, right? Where can you identify or can we accept that some things that we assume are an either or battle, black and white, one side must be right and one side must be wrong, are actually both and tensions that can't be solved but must be accepted as they are both equally needed. For example, maybe not mental being per se, but say take care of myself versus take care of the organization, right? That's like one of the tensions under the mental well-being stuff, right? So do I take care of myself or do I take care of my organization? The answer is both. There isn't a simple way about this. And the way you distinguish whether you're dealing with a both and situation is you ask, is A good? Is B good? And is too much of a bad thing? Is too much of B a bad thing? So taking care of yourself, is it a good thing? It is. Taking care of the organization, is it a good thing? Yes. Is there such a thing as taking care too much of yourself? Yep, that's true. Is there such a thing as being excessive about taking care of the organization? Absolutely. Right? And what would be the antidote of, say, taking care of yourself too much, right? So I take care of myself until there's a tipping point and I'm getting a bit excessive, a bit indulgent. Okay, time to course correct and now take care of the team or take care of the organization, right? Take care. Then there'll be a tipping point again. And what do I do now? I go back and take care of myself. So this bit of the roller coaster infinity loop that you're in, that's going to be all of life. And actually, what's hard for people to digest is how many both ends any one single person is coping with it every single day. It's a lot. But we only pay attention to the ones which are most painful and most imbalanced for us. Yeah, we circle back to your question on is there such a thing as too much attention on mental well-being? Yes, there is. But I would look at what are the both end situations underneath that are all under this big title called looking after my mental well-being, right? So looking after my mental well-being could be, let me take care of myself. Let me spend time at home. Let me not talk about things. That could be a version of like mental being, right? And there will always be this flip side, right? When do I keep to myself and when do I open myself up to others? When do I take a break and when do I go back into work? And if we keep seeing as either ors, it doesn't help us. Yeah, because either or thinking makes it seem like one side is correct and one side is wrong. And that's not true. Both sides are equally correct. But the skill is to recognize when both sides get into excessive and then you course correct. Yeah.
I'm sure that the examples you mentioned of that balance in an individual also display in a workforce where some people might find that the workforce is tipping over a balance that they're comfortable with. And I'm just wondering, what are some telltale signs, or what should an individual do if they are in an environment where they feel like it's being maybe too excessive in a certain way,
Yeah.
or maybe it is in some way unpleasant for them, or maybe even borderline toxic? What should they do about it? Do you think that this is an organizational level, so they should leave the company, or do you think this is the point where it's like an organizational change where they should go for workshops and so on?
That's okay. I'll say that there's a lot going on in that question. So if I could ask you to simplify it into one simple question, like where should we begin? What question should we start with?
I think it's more of as an individual, how do I know whether it's a me problem or like an organizational problem where I want to voice this out to management and maybe they can do something about this?
Yeah, no, that's good. I would say a healthy perspective is to first do a bit of reflection, right? And to recognize that there are different levels of a situation, right? That you can take a look at, right? There's always going to be a me level. There's always going to be a me and someone else level. There's always going to be a me and a group or a team level. Then there's going to be me and, let's say, org level, right? If we don't want to bring in the departments and stuff. But bare minimum, there's at least 4, right? Say something is not panning out well at work. It is a healthy check-in to explore, is it because there's something going on in me? Is it because there's something that is going on between me and colleague or me and boss? Or is it a me and the team thing, that there's a team way of working that's not great? Or is it truly a organization-wide thing? And the organization level is you're looking at processes, you're looking at policies, you're looking at things that cut across the entire system, you know. So if you look at burnout, for example, burnout is a complex issue. It can be a complex issue, right? Because burnout is sometimes because there's something going on an individual level, right? The individual's living a very imbalanced life and it's got nothing to do with, let's say, everything else, right? Let's say assuming everything is actually great and perfect. The individual, however, is caught in their own weird little dysfunctional hamster wheel, right? Then that's fine. That's an individual thing. Best for an individual to sort out, right? But say you check in, actually, I'm quite clear. It's not really a me thing, right? The burnout could be it's a me and, say, my dynamic between my boss or between a particular colleague that I feel very competitive with, right? Then it's looking at what's the interpersonal dynamic going on down there. Sometimes it's a team culture. The organization, let's say, could have all the beautiful, healthy processes down there. But the team itself, maybe it could be because of 1 or 2 very influential individuals are caught up in their own like weird little dysfunctional hamster wheel. So this is the tough part when you look at what needs to change in an organization. The first step is to look at what level am I dealing with? And for a lot of times, it's not just one level. Yeah, it's usually a mix of at least 2 or 3 things happening at each level. Yeah, and what's useful is when everyone who's involved in the situation chooses to look at it from this as objective as possible. It's never going to be purely objective, but as objective as possible. Let's try to solve the problem and not try to solve each other. There's a difference. If I think I want to solve the problem and you are not the problem, I'm not going to treat you as the problem, but I'm going to treat you and I as people who are suffering from a problem. Then you have more space and room to explore solutions. Yeah, but nobody likes being treated as the problem and you get very defensive about it. Yeah.
I feel like these tips that you're talking about, or seeing the problem as a problem and not me versus you, are all very relevant to like relationship and
totally.
life, interpersonal relationships, and so it's so relevant. I'm sure these frameworks that you use are like so applicable to something I can use.
It applies
like,
to everywhere.
Yeah, the framework you mentioned, is it a me thing? Is it just a bad day? Or is it like maybe there's a real problem between me and you right now?
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was really useful, that all these frameworks that you mentioned were not just useful back back when you were having teaching youth in the past, but also now in organizations and how actually you can also apply to relationships as well. Yeah, it seems like everything is very interconnected in that sense, I would say. And just out of curiosity, how did you brush up your knowledge on all of these frameworks and find out more? I know you mentioned a lot about reading, but is there anything in particular that made it really useful for you to say that, okay, these frameworks are really useful.
Yeah.
I want to talk about them in maybe my workshops.
Yeah, since you referenced the time when I was teaching these 18-year-olds, right? I was teaching them when I was 25. I'm 47 this year, right? So in my 20s when I'm teaching them, it's not that I know all of these frameworks. I don't. All I know is there's a problem that needs to be solved. In that time, the problem was, how can I find a way to get them to think more deeply about the world so that they would do something in the world, right? So I would then search the world for real frameworks. So for example, because the subject I was teaching them was like general paper, right? And they would be handling adult questions like, oh, how can you solve poverty or something? So if I know the final problem I'm trying to solve is not how do I help this kid get an A, but my final problem is how can I help them to think maturely about poverty, then I would search the field of poverty alleviation. And okay, what do real people trying to deal with poverty think through? And then I'll take that and I'll teach it back to the kids because I was interested in getting them to learn real things. And that's the process. So it's not that I had all of these frameworks and I taught them to the kids. I had maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frameworks that were relevant back then. And as I age and the work evolved, right, I don't know which framework or which theory I need to know. But what I know is the problems that people want me to solve. So if I sit down, let's say, with a client organization and they tell me, hey, I have this problem that people keep working in silo, right? What's that about? I'm not going to go in and say, oh, I'm this expert who knows everything about silo mentality and all that. I listen to the org, I listen to the people, what's going on there, and then I search. I search the world for who's trying to solve this problem and what theories and frames do they use that are really relevant and powerful. And let me see how I can integrate that or contextualize it back to the org. Long story short, you want to pay attention to what is the real problem you're trying to solve. And if you are focused on solving that on behalf of the people who are suffering from that problem, then you will search the world for what really works. Rather than, search the world for what's the best-selling book right now telling me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So would you say just now when you mentioned your 4-level framework from the problem is me and someone else, me and a group, would you say these workshops that you conduct, the problems are throughout the 2nd to 4th layer after me? Or would it mainly be at a company level?
I'll say my approach to cultural change is to join the dots or to help my clients join the dots between what's happening at the individual level, interpersonal level, group level, department level, organization level, cultural level, right? Environmental, global level, right? It's all happening all at the same time, right? How do I join the dots for them? It's not, I want to be clear, it's not every client that needs me to join all of those dots down there. But it's important as a practitioner and as a leader to see that we are not isolated creatures, right? The person that comes to work every day, the individual that comes to work every day, they are impacted by things happening all around them, right? What's happening at home, what's happening inside their soul. What happened to them in their childhood. It's all happening all at the same time, right? So the modern workplace doesn't have to like, oh my God, are you asking me to be like their therapist or something? It's not that. But it's to just have an awareness and an empathy that all of this is happening at the same time for people. Yeah, that's the reason why I would disagree with statements like, oh, leave your emotions out of the workplace, or, oh, in the workplace, just be professional. Keep all your personal stuff at home. I understand it, and I also think that's an unreasonable statement. And it is contrary to the facts. People are bringing their emotions to work. Because if they're not, then they're dead. A live person has emotions. A live person has a childhood. A live person does have trauma, and then doesn't mean that we have to solve that in the workplace. It just means we have to be fully aware that when you hired someone to come to work, you weren't hiring a robot.
Yeah.
You were hiring a person. And that can be so hard for organizations to grasp sometimes, right? It's a person. And you are a person too. The boss is also a person, right? And if we could respect each other's personhood and respect that everyone's going through things, and let's make life a little bit easier for each other by helping to make bits of our professional life clear and the relevant and necessary parts of our personal life clear. So I'm not an advocate for go to work and then spill all of your 20,000 chapters of your life story to your colleagues. It's not about that. That's inappropriate. But there should be some permission and space for us to say even, I'm going through something really hard at home right now. I'm not comfortable with sharing all the details, but I just want you all to know that, so that in the next few months, when you see me looking a bit down, you understand where that's coming from. And all I need for you guys for support is just give me a bit of space, give me a bit of understanding. I will still try and show up the best I can, but there's a lot going on right now,
Yeah.
And that to me is like just the baby step of it's an appropriate, it's personal, but it's also professional at the same time. The professional is a person. And I want all workplaces to behave a lot more human in accepting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of these problems faced by people in a company are all like individuals, maybe having grudges with one another. How does it escalate to upper management for them to sound out that, hey, it's time to make a change and maybe do an overall organizational change? Because after all, it's all individuals like me and you. How does it like?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Some disagreements, let's just say there are disagreements, right? Some disagreements, or some we have like differences in working style and all that. Some of that can be solved on the interpersonal front. That's not necessarily, let's escalate it all the way up to upper management so that they can do something about it. Because if it really is a thing that the two department heads can sort out, then of course upper management's going to be like, I got so many things to do. But I have to say that in a case where there is repeated dysfunctional behavior or repeated toxic behavior, especially if it's from someone with power in the organization, that people on a peer level or in a reportee level can't do anything about. I can't tell off the boss who is being a little bit like verbally abusive. I can't. I can maybe send some little notices to HR like, hey, the guy, he's a bit mean, whatever, right? I would think in those situations, the organization has to intervene. And one of the things that I find very hard to digest or accept is when organizations choose to enable or deny really bad behavior done by very powerful people in their organization. And there tends to be an over-tolerance for high-performing jerks or high-performing abusers because this person brings in so much money, or, well, this person is the face of the organization. And all that is organizational cowardice. It's important for organizations to have the courage to say, like, certain behaviors are not acceptable. And not acceptable means when this behavior emerges, there are consequences. And not every organization is prepared to execute on consequences. And as long as they don't, then everybody gets the message loud and clear.
Of what the organization stands for.
Correct, because it's one thing to say, oh, we want a psychologically safe work environment. Oh, we want a lovely place where we all have respect. And that's all well and good, but people pay attention to behaviors and consequences. And if there are certain people who are not behaving in the way that the organization says is their values, then they get the message loud and clear. That's the actual values of the organization. Yeah, and that can be a really hard pill to swallow for people. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. One last question I have is actually what's your message to people in their 20s? How do they decide whether this is the organization for them or not? Whether this culture is a right fit for them or is it like a misfit?
No. I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that you have to be in a certain organization, right? Or, oh, things aren't going to get better than this organization. Or you may have a story that, oh, it's going to be like that everywhere. And actually, it's the stories that keep us trapped in not great situations, right? So I'd say if you are in an organization and something's just not working for you, you can examine, like, where's this feeling coming from, right? Is it, objectively speaking, is it a fair thing I'm pointing out? Say, is it fair for me to want higher wages? Is it fair for me to want not to work overtime so much? And it's all going to be situational, right? But you want to do a bit of that work for yourself first. Is my observation fair? And if you're like, yeah, actually, that is quite fair, or that's actually what I need right now, then make your move, right? I think another rule of thumb I might have is if you're trying to fit in every day in your organization, rather than feel a genuine sense of belonging, then that may not be great for you long term. And sometimes it's not an organization fault thing. We all know when we truly belong in a place. Belonging is, I feel, that psychological safety to be myself. I feel that psychological safety to work at my best capacity, to agree, to disagree, but I can be me at my very best. But some organizations or sectors, when you're in there, and sometimes it's because it's a dysfunctional sector and organization, and sometimes it's simply because this is just not where you're meant to be. And that could be a really good org, it could be a really good sector, but it just isn't a good fit for you. Like, you don't feel that belonging, but every day you feel like, I'm just trying to fit in here. I'm just trying to wear the clothes of a lawyer and pretend to be a lawyer, but deep down, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to be an engineer. I don't know. So you can only take that kind of dissonance for a while. And every individual needs to make that decision for themselves. How long can I put up with that dissonance? And at what point do I say, I'm done with that and I'm going somewhere else where I can feel a little bit more at ease with who I am and what I want to be, and show up as the best version of me. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing, Shiao-Yin. You really made me start thinking about what I should look out for in an organization, what individuals should look out for, and some frameworks to consider when we are having a problem, not just at work, but I guess also in our interpersonal relationships. Is it a me thing? Is it something that I think can be solved even when I look at it from a third-party point of view? So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. Maybe if you could share with us where we could find you, more information about you on.
You could look me up on LinkedIn, Shiao-Yin Kwek, right? There's only one of my name, so that's like super easy to look up. And you can also look up my website, www.ourcommonground.com.sg. Lots of information there about the training and the consulting that I do. Yeah.
And to everyone watching, you can find us on YouTube and Spotify. Once again, thank you for coming on board and see you all soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was an episode of In Conversation with YWLC. Hi everyone, we're from the Young Women's Leadership Connection, YWLC. We are a volunteer-run organization operating on a not-for-profit basis, aimed at supporting and nurturing young women aged 21 to 35 in Singapore in their personal and professional lives through mentorship, leadership development, social impact, and networking. Find out more about our community at ywlc.org.sg.